Oh, hey Braves. I'm just fishing for your next video. I think I caught something. It's a big one.
Okay, so once again, I'm out here at Lions Park doing my ecological study alongside of you guys. And what are we doing today? What are we doing this week? Well, this week is all about ecological relationships. Basically, the way organisms interact with each other in their ecosystem. Examples are predation, where one animal or one creature is eating another. Competition, where you have two separate species or maybe members of the same species working against each other for the same resources. That can be plants all crowded around in the same area. Like you can see, there's plenty of plant competition all behind me here on the riverbanks. It is full of plants as far as you can see, and they're all growing together and trying to fight each other to get to the sunlight, which is a limited resource for them. There's only so much space, right? Other examples of competition are animals trying to go after the same food source, the same pollen source, things like that. Then we get into symbiosis, and there's three different types of symbiosis. There's mutualism, where both creatures or organisms are benefiting from their relationship together. Commensalism, where one organism is benefiting, but the other one isn't affected at all. And parasitism, where one organism is benefiting and the other one is being negatively affected. Examples of symbiosis would be pollination. There's lots of pollination going along the riverbank or the creek bank here, lots of little flowers and organisms going to those. Example of commensalism could be a squirrel nest, a bird nest, something of that nature, where you have a creature actively building a nest on a tree, but it's not hurting the tree in any way, shape, or form. So the squirrel or the bird gets the benefit of protection and a safe place to sleep, and the tree is unaffected in general. And then even parasitism, and there's several examples of parasitism out here in this particular ecosystem. One of the main sources of parasitism that I have seen since I've been out here are mainly vining plants crawling up the side of different trees, taking away their resources at the roots as well as their sunlight and things that they need to survive, as well as parasitic wasp and other insects which lay their eggs on the insides of leaves and the petiole, the stems of the different plants here, mainly the oak tree. You'll see a lot of different garballs and things like that. It provides protection for the eggs as well as a potential food source, but the tree itself is losing leaves as a result. It makes the leaves sick and it takes away resources from the tree, so it's technically an example of parasitism. There are examples of all of these things everywhere in this ecosystem, though it is a little early in the morning, so I'm not seeing a lot of insect activity. It was like 60 degrees, actually it was cooler than that. It was about 55 degrees when I started this morning, and insects, well, they're cold-blooded, so they have to wait until it warms up before they can start moving around and doing their jazz. But anyways, that's what we're doing today. So what I have here is an example, once again, of predation. Some sort of an insect has gone through here and completely consumed all of the leaves off of this particular branch. And you can see that this particular plant continues to experience predation. Now, I have been unable to identify what creature is doing this, but generally caterpillars and other larvae of insects will start from the outside of the leaf and work their way all the way in. So they tend to consume the entire thing. Other insects you'll see will start from the inside and work their way out. I still haven't been able to find the little critter who's responsible for this, but this is, once again, an example of predation. As you can see, the trees directly behind me are all growing at an angle. And this is a good example of what competition in plant species looks like. Plants, trees, as hard as they may be, can slowly bend themselves and grow in the direction of wherever the sun is. And if they have another tree right next to it that's taking up some shade, or sorry, taking up some of their sunlight, they can really grow to some extreme angles. So, obviously, there are more plants out here in this particular spot than there is space. So you start to see all of the different plants here growing in every which way or possible direction they can to try and get to that very valuable sun, that abiotic resource they need to carry out photosynthesis. Okay, so there are two examples here of mutualism that I want to share with you. Number one, this honeysuckle, Japanese honeysuckle, has put off little red berries for us. And now, we don't want to eat these, they'll make us sick. However, show you what's in my hand here. These little berries, like the one that just went down my jacket pocket, or my jacket sleeve there, are produced by the Japanese honeysuckle plant. And this is an example of mutualism because a berry is full of all sorts of sweet sugars and other nutrients that you, an organism, would want to consume. But why would this plant create and go through all of this work for you to come and just take its berry away? Well, inside of that berry is a seed, and as you consume the berry, generally the seeds are so small that you don't hurt them, you don't destroy them. They make their way through your digestive tract, and then you leave the nicely fertilized seed behind to pop up as a brand new plant. So this is a strategy to disperse their seeds out into nature. You get a nice sugary berry to eat. If you're an animal that can actually digest this, again, don't eat these berries, they'll make you sick. And the plant gets to spread its progeny, its baby plants, all over the place, wherever you decide to drop down and leave a nice deposit. So, that is one example of mutualism here. Another example I want to show you is just underneath. This right here is what is called aster. And aster is just the family of plants that are known as daisies. And these guys, gals, whatever you want to call them, they're technically both sexes. These are late pollinators, or late bloomers. Sorry, not pollinators. So what happens is these will start putting on their buds towards the end of July, and at the end of September or so, they will pop out and produce their flower. Now, why is this an example of mutualism? Well, this is one of the last pollen sources and nectar sources for the pollinators in this area. So just as your bees and your butterflies and everything else are getting ready to finish out their life cycle or prepare for winter to, bees survive over winter, this is their last food source to get ready for that. And they come along, they grab the nectar out of the flower, which is basically just sugar water for them. Some of them will actually eat the pollen grains, and once again, the daisy, the aster here, gets pollinated, and it's able to create seeds and the next generation of plant. So this is yet again another example of mutualism in this little ecosystem down here by Lions Creek. What you can see up here in the tree is a squirrel nest. And this is an example of commensalism. The squirrel is getting the benefit of a safe place to live and raise its young. The tree isn't really affected in any way, so it's benefiting the squirrel, but not the tree. So one thing I want to show you here is an example of parasitism. Parasitism is one of those things that sometimes is hard to identify in nature. You have to look very close and you have to consider what you're seeing. On this big oak tree here, you can see these oak leaves have these little balls that grow out from the outside of them. For example, right here, they're little brown balls that are on the outsides of this leaf. And you can also see right here on the petiole, which is the stem of this particular branch, there is a big kind of growth. It looks like a wart or something like that. It's a big pink, or not pink, it's a big green bubble inside of the soft tissue of this particular branch here. And what has happened is that insects have laid their eggs on the inside of the leaf. They've injected their leaf or their egg material in the tissue of the leaf, or in this instance, the petiole of the branch here, this oak tree. And what happens is, well, the little eggs and things, they'll hatch, and now they have a food source immediately available for them as they hatch. This is considered a parasitic relationship because the eggs, little baby critters, they get everything they need, and the eggs stay protected inside of the leaf or inside of the soft tissue of the plant, and the plant itself gets nothing out of the relationship. In fact, it's potentially harmed by the relationship. So you can see here this particular branch all over the leaves on here. Several examples of this. Several examples of parasitism. Another example of parasitism, if you look here behind me, is a vine growing up this tree. And this vine here is what's basically called common periwinkle. And it's used for ground cover. The reason it's considered a parasite in this particular instance is because this tree here does not want this thing growing up it. In fact, this vine will climb all the way up the tree, out to the branches, and eventually cloud out or block out all the sunlight that the tree needs to survive. So in that way, it acts as a parasite. You can also call this competition. And you can consider the common periwinkle vine just to be a better competitor than the tree. How you want to look at that is up to you. I tend to look at it as a parasitic relationship because, again, the vine is benefiting greatly. It's getting to higher areas that it normally couldn't. Vines can't grow straight up by themselves. They need something to latch onto. So in this instance, it's taking advantage of the tree's height to get up to the upper canopy so it can get access to all the sunlight. And again, it's harming the tree as it does this. Now, you might call this competition because technically they're both fighting for sunlight, and that is what the vine is taking away. So in that instance, you're welcome to use that as an example. But it does show you how sometimes there can be a little wiggle room in between considering which one of these things is doing what, or what their actual relationship is. Another thing I want to show you is a decomposer. So the tree that this periwinkle vine is growing up is actually already dead. And the reason I know that, number one, is it's missing the other half of its trunk there, but you can see there's some mushrooms growing at the base of the trunk here. Mushrooms are decomposers. Decomposers break down dead material and return it back to the constituent parts that are needed for life, so that all that stuff doesn't get locked up and wasted and can be reused. So right now, those mushrooms growing on the tree, those big white mushrooms that look like my hat, well, they're getting access to the energy they need to survive. They're just doing it off of something that's already dead. So right here behind me is, once again, honeysuckle, and I love bringing this plant up for so many reasons, and one of them has to do with competition. So one of the problems with invasive species is that these things don't have any natural diseases or predators or herbivores that are adapted to eating them. So behaviorally, animals don't know whether or not to eat these berries, and a lot of the species here haven't developed the enzymes necessary to break some of the chemicals down in these particular berries. So what that means is, for the most part, these red berries stay on here all winter long until they fall off, but also too, there's nothing to cut back the population of the honeysuckle. So what happens is, they outcompete native species for space, for soil resources and light resources. And what that does is it creates entire swaths of area in an ecosystem where this is the dominant species of plant. As I said in a previous video, the problem with these things outcompeting the other plants that are native here is that these only put off a flower in the spring. So all of your pollinators who like to hang out on the edges of forests and wooded areas to find all the different species of daisies and sunflowers and everything else that will flower throughout the spring and into summer, well, they're all pushed out of the way. And then you only get one pollination source for your pollinators, and that's only during one time of year. The rest of the time of the summer and the time when all those pollinators are looking for food, well, they don't have anything. So these invasive species are actually very damaging to the ecosystems that they're in because they're able to outcompete all of the other species. And to prove to you that this thing is outcompeting all the native species, I'm going to go on ahead and take you on a little walk to show you all of the honeysuckle along the edge of this forest. Spots where it is absent, you can actually see here is a pollinator source for your different organisms. So we found ourselves a spot that is free of the honeysuckle, and lo and behold, you have all sorts of different plants here. Obviously, you have the poison ivy right there. We don't like that stuff, but you can see there's a hickory tree here growing. You've got this beautiful little aster or daisy, field daisy here growing, and even behind me, there's another white flower. I will aim it where that would be called snakewort or snake root. Now you actually have some species of plants that are flowering right now because they haven't been completely crowded out by the Japanese honeysuckle. But as I pan my camera around here, you'll notice again the main species of plant is the honeysuckle. So this is a situation where competition has gone awry. It's actually actively hurting the ecosystem thanks to an invasive species. So behind me here on the forest floor, you can see that there is only really one main type of plant. That plant is something that is, once again, an invasive species. It's called common periwinkle. And this was brought here to Kansas as a plant for ground cover to help, green up your gardens, and it's something that's low maintenance and it keeps back the weeds. The problem is once it gets into the ecosystem, it completely takes over. And as far as I can see in every direction, this forest floor here is completely covered in it. Well, just like with the honeysuckle, that means it's crowding out native species of plants that the insects and other animals in this ecosystem rely on throughout the year. So, once again, this is a situation where competition goes awry because this plant doesn't have any natural predators or diseases to keep its populations in control. So hopefully this video gave you some very real examples of exactly what ecological relationships look like in an ecosystem. As I said in the video, it was fairly cold that morning, so most of the activity that we would see, mainly insect activity, well, that was fairly reduced. So most of my examples were ecological relationships and how they presented themselves in plants. I am going to provide you another video, basically after I post this one, walking you through some other examples and how to include all of this information in your project slides. So, with that, I'll catch you later.